But if we could just be trauma aware, I mean, please, let's all be trauma informed, but if we could just even be trauma aware where we understand the impacts of trauma on mothers and birthing people and parents, then, the care that they receive is going to be less triggering, re-traumatizing, and help people really harness and live into their resilience.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to No Place Like Home. I am Larissa. Forgot my name there for a minute. And I'm here with Jess, my beautiful co-host, and we are back with the ever beautiful Dusk. I will just preface, as I did in our last episode, that we are touching on the topic of childhood sexual assault. So if it feels like a heavy topic for you, as gentle as we will talk about it, please feel free to not have this be your episode or have little ears around. Dusk, thank you again for being with us. We finished the last episode, and if you haven't listened to the last episode, I very much encourage you to go back. But we got to the point of you have birthed your beautiful child and gone through a few trials, and we're into postpartum. Talk about that with us.
So one of the coping mechanisms for childhood, children who are navigating complex trauma is bargaining. So if I just do this, then this won't happen. Or if I just do that, then that'll result in this. And it is a way to feel like you have control over an uncontrollable situation. And I didn't realise, but I had made a bargain that if I had a positive birth, then I would not get postnatal depression. Like, that's possible. And look, I do know, that a positive birth can have a huge impact on our well-being. But when it comes to the complexity of trauma that I had lived through, a positive birth just wasn't going to cut it. I needed so much more than a positive birth, and a week in bed. I really had a fear of having postnatal depression. For whatever reason, I just latched onto that as if I can just prevent that with my positive birth, then everything will be okay. And I do this a lot where I'll just be like, if I can just get the right couch for my office, then my business will succeed. Like, you make these, if I can just get the right sleep toy, my baby's sleep challenges will be solved. You just clutch onto these solutions, and it's a way of coping because you pin all your hopes on this. It's all of the anxieties channeled into this one thing, and then you get it and you think, okay, we'll be right from here. And I wasn't. I experienced really high hypervigilance because of the re-traumatisation that we spoke of in the last episode. So I was my whole nervous system was constantly heightened, trying to protect me, trying to protect my baby. And it was, I say manageable in this, which you just want to throw that word in the bin, but I had a significant amount of intrusive thoughts that would just come, it was my brain just trying to protect me. Like, this is a danger. Okay, move that rock so that when my child is 3, she won't cut her head open on it. Okay, another intrusive thought. Okay, my partner can't drive to his parents. It's too far. They could have an accident. And these intrusive thoughts, I just shut them down, put them aside, shut them down, put them aside. But as my postpartum went on, they just became so high in number that my whole day would just be this constant battle with my brain trying to protect me. And I think I would try to voice it and say to friends, do you ever have unhelpful thoughts? And they're like, oh yeah, I'm scared I'm going to drop the baby. And I'm like, yeah, but do you have 100 of those a day and they're a lot more violent? And they're like, no. And I remember my first friend who kind of had the courage to say, no, Dusk, I didn't experience that. And I was like, wow, okay, I need to get some support because I don't want to keep living like this. You know, one thing that has really driven me throughout my life is just this desire for more. I want more for myself. I don't want to live with, you know, the impact of my trauma. I acknowledge that I have lived this, but if I can, you know, shift coping mechanisms or where I'm impacted by it, I want to reclaim, you know, my autonomy, and I want to, I want to tell my brain it's okay, I'm safe when I am. So I was retrospectively diagnosed with postpartum OCD, and when I was given that language, I'm like, oh, yes,
I know that relief.
Yeah, that's what I was experiencing, and to be able to validate, like, that was huge. And that was a huge experience to have in motherhood. And I think what is so taboo, like being a survivor of sexual assault is so taboo, but becoming a mother as a survivor, it's unspoken about. And I just think, you know, when a veteran comes home from war, we culturally understand PTSD. We understand loud noises, night terrors, and we have so much acceptance and empathy and support, as we should. But when a mother who is a survivor experiences, you know, the chaos that is the intersection of motherhood and our story, it's completely done in the dark.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to change.
Wow. So you spoke to me about the inner split.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that a little?
Absolutely.
Because I find it fascinating, and I think anyone who's listening who's been through what you've been through, or, you know, again, it's just people knowing how to support people who have been through what you've been through.
Absolutely. So I did my matrescence coach training with Mama Rising, so Amy Taylor Kabaz, and she talks about the inner split of the woman that you were and the mother that you're becoming, and that actually there's this matrescence is the journey of kind of bringing the two back together as one whole part of yourself. And I resonated with that so much, but as I lived into my motherhood, I noticed so many inner splits that were unique to me as a survivor. So one of the biggest ones is that inner split from being the dutiful daughter to then being the protector. So, or even, you know, if you weren't the dutiful daughter, like the self-preserver and then the protector. So for me, I'd spent, you know, a good 6 years in therapy. I had been tending to my story. All of my energy had gone into building my coping mechanisms, learning how to regulate, learning how to just even breathe, you know, from my lower diaphragm, because I'd lived, like, learning not to live in fight or flight. And that takes so much energy, so much time, so much inner resource. And then suddenly I've got this newborn and all I want to do is protect her. And I want to protect her from all of the things that I've had to do, you know, to heal and move with my own story. And there's this inner split where, you know, she's crying, she needs comfort, I'm triggered, I need to tend to myself, and yet, you know, what do I do? Or, you know, I'm visiting my mum and her partner has decided to renovate the flat in her final weeks of life, and there is not a single place that I can safely lay my daughter, my 5-month-old daughter. So I have to hold her in my arms. And there's the part of me that just wants to break down and say, what? This is not okay.
Yeah.
But in that moment, like, my priority is protecting her. And so that energy and that resource is split between that self-preservation and that protection. And I think that again, that flows into another inner split of self-regulating and co-regulating because, my nervous system, it's tender. She's a tender little one.
Yeah.
And I have like if you're trying to steal a diamond and I have a lot like that, those lasers, that's my triggers.
Yeah.
And you got to,
Go up and down, weave around.
Absolutely. And, and you're going to hit a red laser. And in motherhood, that's
God, yeah.
No matter how you contort yourself.
No, you can't. You just can't. And so already, that work of self-regulating every day, it becomes amplified because there's so much more triggers when you enter motherhood. So the self-regulation increases, but then the co-regulation that you need to do with your child increases. And, that's an inner split that I still carry today because my need to regulate, my daughters need to regulate. And yet we're doing all of this internal work and it is so unseen, to self-preserve or, when I say dutiful daughter, I mean like that's part of self-preservation, keeping yourself safe within a family that is unsafe. And then that protection of I won't let this happen to my child and all of the work that you do, to keep them safe. And like I remember one example, my daughter had a lot of kinder refusal and one day she said, I don't feel safe. And you can imagine how triggered I was.
Oh my goodness.
And I think what she meant was like, I'm just not comfortable. I'm not happy. I'm sad. But I heard my child self saying I'm not safe. And I put it on that same, my nervous system can't distinguish. She just doesn't want to be at kinder. She wants to be with me. My nervous system is saying your child is at risk of what you went through, which was not the reality. And the work that it takes to bring my nervous system back down whilst also responding to my child who's having a moment where she's not happy, she's struggling, she needs me. That is the experience of a mother who is a survivor.
So what can we be doing to support survivors? I mean, because there would be so many amongst us that we don't know because, as you said, it's such a taboo. It's so unspoken. So many people go through this in silence.
Yeah.
So many people would go through this without having done the tons of work that you've done.
Yeah.
How can we be, what can society be doing? What can we be doing as individuals to be supportive, especially when we don't always know that people are going through this? I mean, that's a really complex question that there is no straight answer for. But,
I think it's multi-layered. There's things we can do on the personal level, on a cultural level and an institutional level. So on a personal level, doing our own work, whether if we're a survivor, bringing in those supports as you are able. Like I just remember avoiding counselling for years because I just wasn't ready, but bringing in those supports as you're able. And as, a support, just becoming trauma aware, understanding, these impacts, reading books about, what the experience is like, listening to, people like me share. And then culturally, I would love in, 10 years that the same understanding that we have for veterans we would have for, survivors entering motherhood, that we would just know, what the impact is and that cultural awareness, then it brings it out of the, out of the dark, and it gives a voice to something that is so silently experienced.
Yeah.
And institutions, this is the other part of my work, is bringing trauma-aware education to any perinatal practitioner. And we often throw around, everyone needs to be trauma-informed. And I think that's a tall order to be trauma-informed across all of the different areas of complex trauma. But if we could just be trauma-aware, I mean, please, let's all be trauma-informed. But if we could just even be trauma-aware where we understand the impacts of trauma on mothers and birthing people and parents, then, the care that they receive is going to be less triggering, re-traumatizing, and help people really harness and live into their resilience.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously as a doula, there's so much that I love to do with people, and doing stuff when they're pregnant, I think can lay a foundation into the entry into motherhood or parenthood. But also doing, matrescence work afterwards. There's so much that I love to do, and one of them is simply starting with that, how do you want to feel
Yeah.
in pregnancy and birth? And I've had people say, after that session, because you say, how do you want to feel? And what makes you feel that way? What makes you feel joyful? What makes you feel safe? How can we contextualize that to the birth space? And I've had people say, I felt like this was happening to me, and now I feel like it's happening with me. And, as it, what a shift in the body.
Yeah.
And then with, matrescence, I love to look at, how have you been shaped to view what a good mother is, from your family of origin, from our culture, from the institutions. Okay, we see that, but what's your definition of that as a family? What's your family culture? And sometimes we write up a family manifesto, and they're like, this is us. This is what we're living by. So we don't have to worry about that. And I think when we are able to define what a good mother or a good parent is to ourselves, it restores that power. So
becomes clearer.
Yeah. And we can see what's playing out. So for me, I didn't feel like a good mother until I was 4 years in.
Yeah, right.
And I did, as part of my matrescence training, I reflected on, what's my definition of a good mother? And I wrote down, and it was it wasn't me, it was my, it was my lineage writing, a good mother doesn't experience trauma. And if she does, she sets it aside for the sake of the children. So I had this perception, that was reinforced culturally, that you can't be a good mother if you've experienced trauma, and you just have to set that aside. But if we can create environments where people can acknowledge their trauma and integrate their resilience with motherhood, then that enables them to own who they are and inhabit, bring that inner split together and inhabit motherhood or parenthood, with fullness rather than with deficit.
Yeah, wow.
So important.
Yeah.
I love that. So all of that has obviously led to the work that you're doing now.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about that work and how you work with people, so that for anyone that is listening that may have experienced trauma or, anything else that they may feel resonates to work with you, how can they do that?
Yeah. So I'm a doula, a birth doula, and I work with people whether they've experienced trauma or not, because I think sometimes it's so hard for us to even name that we've experienced trauma because we've been so silenced around that experience. So I work with everyone. I'm just about to introduce a 2-hour birth prep workshop that's not about positions, but it's about how to regulate in the birth space, when you get triggered, how to come back if you dissociate. So it's really around recognizing, those red lasers, what they might be, and then how to come back. And that just came from, one of the hospitals I spoke at asked, can you do this so we can send people to you? And I'm like, okay.
Amazing.
Yeah. And then I am doing education to care providers around trauma-aware care, and a lot of practical tips on, when you walk into someone's space, whether it's the birth space or the postpartum ward, just knock on their door. It is their space.
Yeah.
Let them own that space. Knock on the door, say just open it a few centimeters, just say, hey, this is me. I'm here for this. Can I come in? And then wait for the response, because someone's nervous system the knock is going to be heightened. Okay, this person's safe. Now I choose to let them in. I am in control, and their nervous system will settle. Things like that can have
Just feels like such a foreign thing though.
I know, but it's so simple at the same time. You know,
It
it's such a
is.
simple request,
Yeah.
but
you think about, like, as you were talking then, I was like thinking about me laying in the bed having the children, and I was like, the door was open the whole time.
Yeah.
yeah.
It wasn't even closed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and it was just like a highway. So for me, hearing you say that, I'm like, how would that even happen?
Yeah. And that's where it's so important that we hear from the lived experience of survivors, because for me, I was watching the door my whole childhood, you know?
Yeah.
So of course a hospital door is going to need to be closed with my control over it. But we don't know these things because the experience of people who have lived through traumatic experiences becoming mothers, it's completely unknown. So there's so much that we can, that we can do and we can practice in order to bring that. And then another thing is that I have a website called Dear Dusk where people can write to me as, a bit of like Dolly Doctor for survivors who are navigating motherhood.
Yeah, right.
And I've just started. So I've got one reflection, like what happened what do I do when my children don't listen? It's so triggering when we have not been listened to, when our children don't listen, and just me just saying, yeah, I feel you. Like this happened to me the other day. Here's how I responded. Because I think when I knew that navigating motherhood as a survivor was going to be total red laser chaos, I typed it into Google and there was nothing. And so this is what I would have wanted to find. And yeah, people can ask questions and I'll write back with a letter, and then we're in it together. It's that companionship.
So important.
Yeah.
I can't believe there was nothing.
There was, stuff
Nothing
for
like it.
practitioners.
Yeah.
I think if I typed it in now, it would be very different.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there was things, I just couldn't find them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't as accessible.
And it needs to be
known.
accessible.
It needs to be
needs-
absolutely accessible, culturally known, professionally trained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's only recent that you've gone from working mostly one-on-one to speaking about this. Yeah. So that would have been a huge transition for you.
Yes. It's been huge. And there's been so much fear around me using my voice.
Of course.
And the other day I was like, I had this like woohoo moment in the morning where I was like, yeah, I'd got this great opportunity, and I was like, bring it. And that night I could feel myself go numb. And I thought my body knows the answer, and I listened in and I said, body, what's going on? And I was like, where is this? And I felt it in my tummy. You know that feeling when you hold your tummy in? It was like that feeling from holding my tummy in my 20s. And I said, tummy, what are you saying? And it said, be palatable. Because it was trying to keep me safe. If I am palatable, I'm not drawing attention. And then I was like, well, that's not going to happen. And I felt the energy shift into my arms, which is like, let's go.
Amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a skill to be able to tune in to yourself like that. Truly.
Oh, thank you. It's been hard won from many years of deep listening.
And so I know that a big focus on when we've been chatting this episode and the last has been on the experience of mothers and birthing people.
Yeah.
Is there much support out there for non-birth parents? I mean, I imagine, so the reason this came up for me, and this is a bit of a tangent, but stay with me, there's a Michael Jackson documentary, and the two people that made that doco, when he was charged, they defended him, but he did abuse them. And it was when they became parents and their children were at the age that they were at when the abuse started that they realised that what happened was not okay.
Yeah.
And so I imagine there's probably so many people out there who have pushed it down, blocked it out, minimised it, and then they become parents, and I'm sure that
It reignites.
it would be a lot to go
absolutely.
through. And I mean, is there much support out there for?
First I just have to say, you hear that, and that speaks to the level of how silenced we are and how our culture pushes those memories just so deep within us that It's so significant. So yeah, when this comes up, you know, whether it's for the mother, the birthing person, or the partner, I think finding spaces where it can be heard and received well, acknowledged and affirmed that happened is so important, just in, you know, in terms of friends and families and partners. And then, you know, if people feel able to, CASA is an Australian, it's the Centre Against Sexual Assault, and CASA's been so significant. My CASA counsellor is like one of the 5 people that has changed my life through the support that I received, because they get it. You know, they hear that story and they're like, come on in, let's put the kettle on. You know, they get it. So
Do they also support your partner?
They can.
Right.
Yeah. I think I'd have to check that. But they have free counselling centres all across Australia in every state.
We'll link that in the show notes.
Yeah.
But that's so
such
important.
a significant service. And I think the experience of partners, you know, also if they haven't had their own experience of trauma, it is, you know, they experience vicarious trauma, you know, in many ways through hearing their partner's story and living alongside the, you know, the impacts of that. And, you know, they need support as well. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes they're a safe person and they're part of that co-regulation, and sometimes they're not, and they are continuing to perpetuate that trauma. So I think everybody needs support in order to, you know, for us to really bring that resilience that we have to the surface, and so we can lead from that resilience as we, you know, parent these little ones.
And try and change the trajectory.
Yeah. And I've seen that in my work. I've seen so many people who have survived such, you know, difficult things, birth their gorgeous little children, have, you know, these new stories that they're rewriting. They experience the inner split and they become the protector that they needed for their child. And, you know, we're rewriting intergenerational stories. And that's what can happen when we're able to name and own and centre these stories and allow people to have their experience and be heard and responded to and to move forward.
We do love chatting with our guests about what you think, you know, given your research and your experience in this field, what you think we can be doing. You know, we touched on it before, what we can be doing as a society and as individuals to support people. But
there's a lot around the impacts, you know, and I think that I won't read those, but you can seek them out. Particularly there's an amazing book called When Survivors Give Birth, by Penny Simkin and another author, and that it's very heavy. It's more for practitioners, but it's so validating of, you know, the impact on survivors. But I want to focus on what happens when people experience and receive trauma-aware care, and when we can provide that, you know, that sense of safety, empowerment, choice, collaboration, you know, respect for diversity. It can absolutely change people's postpartum experience. You know, we think it's just about the birth or it's just about that one session, but the lasting impacts are so incredible. And so being able to advocate for that care as well, you know, it has a huge impact. If we can as a society really acknowledge this and respond, it's acknowledging and responding, then people can live into their postpartum with autonomy, you know, over their own body, their voice, because they're not being silenced, and choices, you know, in how to move with the inner splits that come, how to respond to the red lasers, and huge support.
Thank you so much, Dusk. It's been, I mean, I could talk to you all day. We'll be sending each other voice notes later, I'm sure. But thank you for sharing your story and your incredible wisdom with our guests, with our audience.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Dusk.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guest speakers. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and content here should not be taken as medical or professional advice. Please consult your healthcare professional for any personal recommendations and medical care. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate based on the best available information at the time of recording, we welcome any comments, suggestions or feedback via our website contact form, home.com.au/contact. Names and details of personal experiences may have been changed to allow for anonymity and privacy. To join the conversation, join us on social media at Home Postpartum.